Hello, my creative community. Let's jump into this. It is belted sweater season, and here's a cheeky little sew along. Yes, I've had one glass of wine, but let's jump into it anyway. No judgment here. So I'm going to start by pleating my sleeves. You're going to see me fold it in, match the notches, and pin in place. When I come to do the pleats towards the side seam, notice that I leave 1 centimeter for my seam allowance. So I'm just going to pin this in place and baste along the edge. So I'm doing the longest stitch on my sewing machine because I'm working with a neoprene, a lightweight neoprene that's got a little bit of stretch. This is actually a great fabric for this design because it has a little bit of structure to go with it. So I just basted that in place, meaning I didn't do any back tacks or back stitches. And then I move on to creating the belt. Now I just match these up, but by all means pin and baste if you need to, and I sew with an overlocker along the long edge, down one short edge, and along the other long edge, leaving one short edge open. Wow, I can hear myself waffling, and I really hope that that makes sense. I do this with colour match thread, and then optional extra is you can top stitch or edge stitch around it once you bag that through and turn it out. Now turning it out took quite a lot of time, so just have a little bit of patience. But fun news, guys, I've actually moved in to my new studio. So you might hear it's quite echoey, but I am loving life. I cannot wait to film new content in this space. I'm going to have a cheeky little filming wall as a backdrop. I am so stoked to have natural light in my new studio space. Look at my former cowshed. It was a box inside of another box. Ooh, cheeky little dance. Look at me go. Look how happy I am though. I'm still equally that happy in my new space, but I'm so pleased not to be adjacent to any mooing cows, any dust, any kind of farmyard extras. So just notice as I'm bagging it out, I'm running my fingers and rolling the fabric between them to really get a nice crisp corner. And I'm just going to roll that and make it nice and clean. Really nice clean edges there. So, on to edge stitching. Again, this is an optional extra. If you don't want to edge stitch, just make sure that you are really giving it a good press under the iron. The iron can be your best friend with things like this. But because the neoprene is a little bit more bulky, a little bit spongy, this kind of really helped me set the shape. And in terms of the belt, you want it to lie nice and flat, especially for styling options. So yeah, gave it a nice little edge stitch. A little bit wonky in places, but I love the imperfections. We're not all perfect. I ain't no seamstress, I'm a designer. That's my excuse. Moving on then, I'm about to match the shoulder seams. So front and back bodice pieces, match and pin at the shoulder seams. As before, baste it if that is what you feel more comfortable doing, but then you just want to sew these together. I'm then stay stitching around the neckline, which is just running a line of stitches. Again, you don't have to back tack, but once the shoulder seams are sewn together, you want to stay stitch the neckline to avoid any stretching out of shape. This belted sweater can work with both woven and stretch fabrics, but if you are working with stretch, then that's quite an important step to make. I'm then going to be matching my belt pieces up to the front bodice between the notches on the pattern. When you are sewing with the belt, you want to make sure that you're moving it out the way. They're long pieces and you don't want them to get caught when you come to sew the side seams together. So you'll notice that I am tying this in a knot just to keep things out of the way, nice and neat. I'm then bringing my sleeve pieces, here's one I made earlier, and I'm notching that against the shoulder seam and the notches on the bodice, and then I'm going to construct and secure this to the bodice pieces with one easy straight line of stitching. Again, if you are using an overlocker, you might want to baste this first before running it under your serger, overlocker, whatever you call it. I think serger is American, so yeah, you know, all inclusive over here. I call it an overlocker, let's run with that. So laying it out then, you've just attached your sleeve. So Another optional extra would be to top stitch along the shoulder seam and the sleeve armhole. It gives a nice finished effect, but again, if you don't fancy it, you don't have to. Your design, your rules. I'm then going to be matching up the side seams. I'm matching this all the way up to the end of the sleeve and the cuff. Top tip for rethreading your overlocker then is just to tie your thread tails together, as you can see with my shaky hands here. If you just double knot it and run that through as you're sewing, it's a really easy way to rethread your overlocker. So I've caught and secured the edge of my belt into the side seam, but I've also been mindful not to catch the belt lengths, so making sure that's knotted. Matching my neck bands together then, front and back. You can do this twice. So I'm just matching these at the extended shoulder seam, if that makes sense, and sewing those together. You then, optional extra, might want to add a cheeky little label. These labels were from my uni days. That's my full name. What an old lady's name. So I'm just adding these on. It's kind of a nice little touch to, you know, personalize it, say that I made it. But once you've done that, you want to match your neckband pieces, right sides together, pin that in place. Top tip to make sure that your seams align is to put your pin right through the seam on both sides. And then I'm doing this in quarters, so I just want to pin that in place, secure it, quarter way around the neckline and sew that on the overlocker. Voila, here we go. And then you just want to turn that out, right sides out. Again, the iron is your friend in things like this. Working with circles can be fiddly, so just kind of take your time with it. If you are working with a woven, you might want to clip or notch at this stage, just to make sure that you have a nice smooth circle that lies flat when you bag it out. Attaching this to the neckline of the bodice then, this can seem a little bit fiddly, especially if you're following the instructions on the DPL belted sweater pattern, but you just want to match your shoulder seams together, and that's kind of a great place to start before kind of moving around the neckline and matching up against the bodice notches as well. So if you get one side right sides together, it's really easy then to start moving around your sweater and pinning it in place. There's going to be a lot of rearranging. You might have to pull the jumper through the neckline once or twice, but just make sure that once you've pinned it right sides together on one shoulder seam, you're kind of following that around without twisting your neckband. It looks a little bit fiddly here, but kind of it's once you're practically doing it, once you are working through it, you'll kind of see what I mean. Pulling it through here, making sure that it's always right sides together, and you're just sewing one big circle. The belted sweater is quite voluminous, so it looks a little bit more daunting than it is, but this really is a super easy, super simple pattern to sew up with maximum style at the end of it. The results are so worth it. I can knock out a belted sweater in a couple of hours, but I know that most people can do it in a nice afternoon of sewing. So if you want a really quick autumnal make, this is perfect. Just basting that in place before I overlock it then. If anything's a little bit tricky or a little bit fiddly, basting is always the best option. And then you just want to finish that off with your final construction technique. And there we go. Nice and neat. So now I'm folding the cuffs in half, and I'm going to be sewing up the one side on the short edge. Again, this is notched, and what you then want to do is fold them over. I'm doing 2 cuffs in one overlock line of stitching because you can just snip the stitches in the middle, which is quite nice. And then once we're at this stage, you just want to roll them down halfway so that you've got a nice little cuff. I'm going to be poking my hand through this to demonstrate in a minute. Just want to make sure that that's comfortable and that fits. before attaching it to your sleeve. Now, if you do purchase the belted sweater pattern, of course, there is written instruction to go with this with super clear illustrations alongside it that I did myself. So you just want to pin this, matching up the notches, matching up the side seam that's on the underarm as well, and kind of like with the neckline, just work your way around the circle before overlocking and stitching in place. Turn that down, see how my underarm seams line up. The little box pleats are looking cute. I'm really, really happy with this statement sleeve. Belted sweater has some really simple but unique design details. Finally then, let's hem this baby. So I'm going to be overlocking the edge, although if you are working with a knit, it doesn't necessarily need it as they don't tend to fray. But I'm going to overlock the entire hem, as you've seen I've done here. Quite a long, wide bottom sweep going on before rolling and folding it up once, and then I'll be top stitching this. You can either do this with one line of stitching or two, or maybe you want to finish it off with a twin needle, but as I use an industrial lock stitch machine, I just have to do little cheat ways of making it look to a different professional standard. So yeah, I'm just doing one line of stitching to secure my hem. Snipping that off, and there we have it. The belted sweater is honestly one of my absolute favorite designs. It's an original pattern, it's the OG, it's the first thing I launched with, and there are so many ways to tie and style the belt. It's such a simple make. I really hope that that quick blitz through has helped you out. Try it in different kind of textiles. Again, this mid-weight neoprene really holds its structure. Such a beautiful textile to render this in. And you'll get so many compliments, I promise you. Such a fantastic pattern, even if I say so myself. Cannot wait to see your interpretation of it. If you do make this pattern, share it with me across social media using the hashtag DPLBelted. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for tuning in. I'm off to drink another glass of wine, guys. I'm on it tonight.